have gotten through our little technical difficulty, and so let us bring on Alfred Webre. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
How are you tonight? Sorry about that. I don't know
good.
what happened.
Well, I don't know. I think it might be Mercury retrograde. I don't know.
Oh, yeah? So we had you on not too long ago, and we talked about colonies on Mars and even time travel. And I'd like to get into that just a little more, as well as I believe there's some information about the moon as well that we were going to talk about this evening.
Right. Yeah, a lot of very interesting information, which is now making its way out of speculation, because we have firm information.
Okay.
Yeah, good. So do you want me to launch into it, or?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Go right ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, with regard to time travel and extraterrestrials, we've had a very interesting week in that Professor Stephen Hawking, who is a very eminent, quote, scientist, some people say is the sacred cow of science, has launched a Discovery Channel documentary.
Yes.
Right, in which he makes a number of very polarizing statements about extraterrestrial civilizations.
I believe he said, oh, yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, and most recently about time travel. And we can go into each of those. But what we did is we deconstructed each of the statements in our Examiner columns. People can go to either exopolitics.com or examiner.com and just Google my name. And you'll come to these articles. And on examination, it would appear that Professor Hawking is really acting as a purveyor of what's called disinformation, and that's deliberately confusing information. One of the best formulas is to mix in some correct information with some incorrect information to confuse the public about an area that's the subject of a disclosure campaign. So that's what we have been covering about Professor Hawking.
Now, didn't he say that it would be dangerous for us to make contact with extraterrestrials? And why would he say something like that? I mean, if they wanted to now take us out, they could have done it a long time ago.
Yeah, this is very curious. I've got his quote here. He says, quote, "We have only to look to ourselves to see how intelligent life might develop into something we wouldn't want to meet. I imagine they might exist in massive ships, having used up all the resources from their home planet. Such advanced aliens would perhaps become nomads looking to conquer and colonize whatever planets they can reach. If aliens ever visit us, I think the outcome would be much as when Christopher Columbus first landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native Americans. While there may be aliens out there, Hawkins said trying to make contact is a little too risky." So that is clearly a sort of a blanket statement. And what we noticed is that if you went back to a January 2010 conference at the Royal Society. Now, Hawking himself was elected a member of the Royal Society in 1974, one of the youngest members ever. And in a January 2010 conference on extraterrestrial life, a fellow Cambridge professor of his sort of parroted the same line. Simon Conway Morris, who's a professor of evolutionary paleobiology at Cambridge, said, quote, extraterrestrials might not only resemble us, but have our foibles, such as greed, violence, and a tendency to exploit others' resources. And while aliens could come in peace, they're quite likely to be searching for somewhere to live and to help themselves to water, minerals, and fuel.
See, now I can't believe that because, again, they could have done it already if they wanted to, you know?
Yeah. So this is a particular line, and there are some students of extraterrestrials who believe that this accurately describes, say, certain types of extraterrestrials who are hyperdimensional in the fourth dimension. For example, the certain types of greys and reptilians who have a predatory relationship with humanity and who have entered into one-side treaties with the permanent war economy here on Earth. But that doesn't make it for a blanket statement that we should avoid all extraterrestrial civilizations.
If anything, they should avoid us.
Well, no, the argument being, and that these civilizations, particularly the Greys and the reptilians, there are various versions of this, are actually engaged in genetic farming of us.
Okay.
They're farming us for our genes, and that they're actually breeding a new kind of hybrid species to supplant us. Now, some people like Dr. David Jacobs and others believe that we are in dire danger because of that. So I think that Professor Hawking is playing to that fear, but it is a fear that is not exactly grounded, because it is possible to make alliances with ethical extraterrestrial civilizations and not to completely avoid all contact with extraterrestrials.
See, and I believe our government already has, and other governments probably have as well.
Yeah, and there's a history of secret agreements with unethical extraterrestrial civilizations, which some analysts say has led to the phenomena like the 9/11 and post 9/11 domestic police state worldwide and state of world emergency, or state of world, quote, war on terror, which is a manipulated war, and that really is part of a scheme by these manipulative extraterrestrials to have humanity die out or to depopulate humanity or disempower it in some sort of domestic police state alternative.
But then that makes me ask the question, then why wouldn't they just come here and just do it themselves to us? Why would they wait the long wait and not just get it over with immediately?
Well, I mean, perhaps that's something that they cannot do, and we're all we live inside an interdependent multiverse, and the supplanting of species and the taking over of planets is a very serious thing, because it encroaches on the rights and responsibilities of many different civilizations, and even governance bodies, extraterrestrial governance bodies, which may have different plans for the planet. So that's why we may not have one of these all-out wars or all-out attacks for occupation of the planet.
Oh, okay. All right, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Now, go back on the Dr. Hawkins. Is he just playing like he doesn't know about extraterrestrials actually already making contact here, or does he really not know? I mean, I don't know where he might have been the last few decades, but I mean, there's just been so much. I mean, even Roswell. The evidence is there, I think.
Yeah, what we did is that we sort of did a content analysis of his statements in two separate disclosure areas. One was in extraterrestrials, and the other was in time travel. And to take the time travel area first, what he did there was really curious. First of all, in the first half of his statement, which appears in the first episode of this kind of online summary of the documentary, and you can see that it's embedded in the article that we've written about it at Examiner.com or extrapolitics.com. And
okay.
In that article, he first presents sort of a view that time travel is possible, and then shows and depicts in the film something that is very, very much like a time travel portal, such as those which whistleblowers from top secret U.S. Department of Defense time travel projects have talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And then, almost in the next breath, he takes all of that away and says, well, because at the nano level, time travel wormholes are only 1 billion trillionth of a centimeter across, and we would need science through nanotechnology to expand these extremely small wormholes to human size. Therefore, time travel is not possible. Now, that ignores the whole principle of time travel, which is through vortal tunnels using a Tesla-based technology. So all of the theoretical issues have been solved there for at least 40 years. And anybody who did a simple Google search would come upon that. So it's very suspicious what he did with regard to time travel. It's as though it's the classic instance of disinformation, where you mix in a little valid information and then some invalid information in order to thoroughly confuse the listener. And that's what he's done with regard to time travel. Now, with regard to extraterrestrials, what he's done is to if we take another similar event which happened at the Royal Society, the Royal Society was founded in 1660. It had, before that, it had been a secret society, a Masonic secret society known as the Invisible College.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has a whole Masonic tradition to it, an inner gnosis. And it's both of the individuals who have come out with these similar statements on behalf of the Royal Society or at Royal Society functions. They're almost identical in their views, and that's Professor Simon Conway of Oxford and Professor Hawking of Cambridge. And they use almost identical words and phrases to describe something that is very, very one-sided and not grounded in fact. So we suspect there that Professor Hawking has been long groomed. He's been a Lucasian professor of mathematics for over 30 years, and as well as a member of the Royal Society. And he's been groomed almost as a disinformation warship with regard to special issues of disclosure like extraterrestrials and time travel, because it's just so much on point what he's saying that covers up and that causes confusion about the specific items regarding time travel and extraterrestrial civilizations that we're now beginning to reveal through whistleblowers from top secret governmental programs.
Now, does the government just assume that people aren't going to believe it, or are they actually, are these whistleblowers, do they fear for their life for getting this kind of information out there?
Well, I think that both are kind of the case. With regard to propaganda, the governments have a long history. I mean, century old, and of course, the art of propaganda was well developed by the fascists in World War II, Hitler, and now with the Fourth Reich, that we can say is the kind of the permanent war economy that has taken over many of these principles. So they're using the known rules of propaganda and of disinformation, and they assume, and they've been successful with regard to, for example, 9/11, where in the media they've got complete control of the mainstream media with regard to the 9/11 fairy tale.
Oh, they sure do.
And despite polls that about 50% of the population believes that there was a conspiracy there, you will not see that in the mainstream media. And even the current president of the United States goes on to plan the war in Afghanistan on the basis of the 9/11 fairy tale. That's how secure they feel in that, just through the simple use of propaganda and information and disinformation techniques. So,
now, are these lies above the president's head? I mean, is he aware of all this? Do they let him be aware of all this?
that's a good question. That's a very, very good question. And I would say that it depends on the particular area and how much of a willing co-participant Barack Obama is in this kind of national security police state with hyper information management. I mean, this is not only third-dimensional management, but it's multi-dimensional management, because we now know that space-based weapons of mass destruction like HAARP, whose space-based component is the ionosphere, the activated ionosphere, and whose atmospheric component is chemtrails, in order to magnify the effect of HAARP. Well, I've heard Department of Defense software engineers who write the software that HAARP broadcasts into the limbic system of the brains of the North American and human population, telling them what to think, or suggesting to them what to think.
You know, the way things are, I wouldn't doubt that. I really wouldn't.
Yeah. So this is like a very ingrained, very deep information management regime that goes far beyond just black propaganda, but goes into management of consciousness and management of human potential, and management of the developmental levels that humanity is going to be permitted to reach. So all of this figures in the equation. And when you have somebody like Stephen Hawking, I mean, he's been groomed for a long time. He looks kind of odd because of his disease, so people project onto him a lot of empathy, which then can be manipulated if you are, taught how to dissimulate and how to manipulate, which here appears to be the case. That's the most plausible explanation, because otherwise the scientific gaffes that he's making are just too severe for it to be anything other than disinformation.
I couldn't agree with you more, Alfred. I really couldn't. I mean, when I saw that little writing that he did, I laughed at it, really. It's like, nowadays I think most people know that something exists up there. I don't think they know the extent of it. That's why I love having you on, so you can explain a lot of this.
Yeah. Well, this is a really tough one, and this is where there's going to be a lot of discernment in our population, because we do have 50% of the population still supporting 9/11. We have 50% of the population still buying into people like Stephen Hawking. And there are no scientific polls out on him, but I would say that at least that's probably the percentage, because he's been carefully groomed over more than 30 years, and so he can come out and really run the black propaganda in those crucial areas where they want to sow dissent and confusion, particularly with regard to extraterrestrial disclosure and with regard to time travel and teleportation, because those are two technologies that would change they would be game changers on Earth and virtually eliminate the need for the permanent war economy, which is energy-based, because they would eliminate fossil fuels. They would eliminate, for the movement of goods and services, goods and people, they would eliminate all the concrete highways that we need, all the railroad tracks that despoil nature. You would return cities back to the people with, walking pedestrian malls and bicycles and sort of that kind of transport, because people just teleport here and there. And that is the future that the national security state, which is controlled by a corrupt elite, which may be in league with unethical hyperdimensional extraterrestrials or hyperdimensionals, do not want. So we're at a stage now where we can connect all of the dots. We can publish it. We can make it known to the world on respectable publications through the internet, like Examiner.com. But still, we're dealing with that human consciousness that automatically genuflects before the altar and the high priests of science, like Hawking, and journalists really have to document what they're talking about.
Yeah, and going back to the scientist thing, I mean, I had a guy, I believe it was last week, who just didn't want to hear anything that me and my guest had to say, and he believes in the science, he said. And, I'd like to too, but a lot of these scientists get their funding from governments, and, they'll lose their funding if they come out with the truth. It's the government tells them what they expect them to find, I guess. And that's why I think we don't get the truth on a lot of these things.
Right. Well, so if people go to Examiner.com, we just published an article this afternoon on the time travel issue and Hawking. And what we did is we showed that there are at least 3 independent whistleblowers from top secret U.S. projects on time travel that have now come forth, and they have given their versions, and their versions are consistent, so that they're a good source of information. But not only that, we have what's called in the law of evidence. We have documentary evidence. In other words, we have photographs, actual photographs of somebody time traveling. And I think that you've had Andrew Bishago on your program, correct?
He's actually on next week. He comes on. And then the following week I have Laura Eisenhower coming on.
Oh, so, good, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be great. Well, what we do in this article is that we have an actual photograph of Mr. Bishago as a young 6 or 7 year old boy that was taken on the day of November 19th, 1863, at the site of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in Gettysburg, on the battlefield at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And you see him kind of dressed in these clothes that he managed to get from a local person there, because he arrived without any clothes in the teleporter. And he gives a very long explanation relating to the photograph of how time travel works through a world tunnel. So this gives complete lie to Mr. Hawking's attempted disinformation, and even though we have photographs and we have other proofs, it's just very hard and very difficult for the average reader to make that leap and say, hey, my mind is free, and of course the U.S. government has time travel, and of course I can see that Professor Hawking, as one of the youngest members of the Royal Society, is a spook, and that's what Cambridge professors do. Certain selected ones, Cambridge fellows, it's a big spook den. Which is the same way I can tell you that, same way that Harvard is, and it's the same way that Yale is. I mean, I spent 7 years on the Yale campus, and I was a member of the faculty there, and also a fellow, and it's full of spooks. And you go into the secret societies at Yale, places like Skull and Bones, and that's the breeding ground of spooks. So
now, former President Bush was said to have been a part of that group. Is there any truth to that?
Oh, absolutely. Not only President Bush, but the entire Bush dynasty. If you go back to Prescott Bush, his grandfather, and his father, George H.W. Bush, and then George W. Bush, all three of them were members of Skull and Bone. And what that means is that the secret name of Skull and Bone is the Brotherhood of Death. They're a German satanic cult. And so he, Prescott Bush, in the early 1930s, through one of his banks, and a German named Fritz Thyssen, financed Adolf Hitler in the early years, back in the 1920s, in the early years of Adolf Hitler. So they were involved in engendering fascism through Adolf Harriman, another Skull and Bones member, who exported counterfeit plates for making U.S. dollars to the Bolsheviks, along with certain other things. They were, a hothouse for Bolshevism. So they engendered fascism and both Bolshevism and hypercapitalism, and controlled all of the isms, which are ways to control human behavior. And then it was George H.W. Bush, again, the Skull and Bones member, who may have been directly involved in the John Kennedy assassination. There's photographs of a person who looks exactly like Bush outside of the Texas Depository building.
Wow, now that would be a show right there.
Yeah, and George H.W. Bush was instrumental in dismantling the industrial infrastructure of the United States, which now has made it the world's greatest debtor nation without an industrial infrastructure. So with a view toward destroying the United States so that they can have a world slave class coming in with the New World Order. And that was part of George H.W. Bush's tasks as president. And then his son, who was also in Skull and Bones, was tasked with 9/11 in starting World War III, which was the function of September 11, 2001 false flag operation, which was to have been the spark for World War III and a domestic police state worldwide. Now, with regard to time travel and quantum access technologies, both George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush were informed at the same time in a secret briefing of their future future roles as U.S. presidents. They had been pre-identified as U.S. presidents by secret DARPA time travel technology, and they were taken down to New Mexico, and we have eyewitnesses to that. So here you have this quantum access technology that the secret state wants to keep secret, and they keep it secret despite the fact that we have whistleblowers like Andrew D. Basiago and Michael Ralph and another independent whistleblower, and Laura Eisenhower on the Mars side, along with Arthur Neumann going public. They keep it secret by deploying these kind of disinformation battleships like Professor Stephen Hawking, who gets up and says, oh, time travel is possible, but guess what, it's not possible. And sort of being a push-me-pull-you in the information game. And that's how it works. And, you know, it's so transparent that we can call it now, and people can see it, but they're counting on the mainstream media, and they're counting on the use of HAARP, through which they brainwash the public and mind control them into apathy, to where the public is too numbed out to really see anything or do anything.
Now, did I read at one point in one of your articles that this HAARP can actually cause earthquakes and weather change and stuff like that?
That is also one of the principal modalities of it. The late Jerry E. Smith, who recently died of cancer under, I would say, suspicious circumstances, he wrote a book called HAARP, The Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy. And HAARP, in other words, a space-based weapon known as HAARP, which is essentially a Tesla energy generator. You turn the entire ionosphere into a Tesla energy generator. So you can either cause earthquakes, or you can affect the weather, or you can zap a city block or a building or an entire city and literally take it out with a scalar weapon attack. But you can cause earthquakes. These are called seismic weapons. Or you can have weather attacks that cause what we call artificial storms. In other words, the cyclone at Myanmar in May 2nd, 2008. You can cause drought. And these are all artificial conditions. And, for example, the Haiti earthquake, 200,000 people were killed. Well, 140,000 people were killed at Hiroshima. So it's the size of a nuclear genocide.
Wow. So now, do the aliens, the extraterrestrials, are they aware of what this HAARP weapon can do?
I would say
are
yes.
Are they behind it even?
Sure. I would say yes, because we have film photos, for example, of the possible use of HAARP as a scalar weapon, a particle beam weapon used against extraterrestrial craft from its deployment at the Pine Gap base in Australia in 1991, and showing how the extraterrestrial craft evaded that particular shot. So I would say yes, that extraterrestrial civilizations, the ethical ones, the advanced ones, in varying degrees, are cognizant of our situation as being held hostage by a belligerent and self-referent and war crimes-oriented elite with very highly developed weapons technology and very highly developed information warfare technology. So what we have here on Earth is the makings of a real spiritual battle at which spiritual warfare is being carried out enormously.
And what side do you suppose we the people will wind up on in the end?
Well, that's a good question. Ultimately, each individual, there's that saying, you come in alone and you go out alone. And we're each responsible for what occurs to us at the soul level in this life journey as multidimensional entities. And we know from the work of Dr. Michael Newton, for example, that we're in this life to gain moral lessons, and if we do engage in dark acts, that we will spend some time that there are karmic consequences, and that we will, this will be part of our development, trying to figure that one out. The issue is this planet having been captured by darkness over such a long period. What will the mass do, and what will the individuals do? Well, there's a great deal of help. There's some reason to be optimistic, even though we've given grounds for a great deal of pessimism up until now. And the reason for some optimism is in the realm of theory, but let's see. If you look at what scientists like Dr. Carl Johan Kalaman is saying, and Barbara Hank Cloud, who's a colleague of mine, lives here in Vancouver, what they say is that the master universe itself is conscious, is a conscious being, and that it's actually transmitting energy and electromagnetic frequencies to us, so that our consciousness can evolve, and it's transmitting those through the galactic centers, the galactic axis, or the galactic black holes of the galaxies in which we live, so that you have this intentional signal, electromagnetic signal, coming through each of the galaxies. And they developed a time acceleration matrix of the Mayan calendar, which holds that, for example, in the year 2011, from February to October 2011, there'll be 20 times as much change as there was between 1999 and the beginning of February 2011. In other words, time is accelerating. And all of this comes from the intentional universe, which is putting out very strong electromagnetic frequencies, which our individual minds and brains, which act as radio receivers, pick up. So to the extent that the human race does focus on what the universe is broadcasting, then we can shift. If we're fixated on fear, on revenge, on conflict, then shift is going to be that much more difficult. And we seem to have now a period of struggle, which is really going back and forth between light and darkness, and we'll see what occurs over the next couple of years.
Okay, Alfred. Well, listen, I want to take a quick break. When I come back, I want to ask you about the moon and,
Sure.
you know, whether we've been there, whether we're still there, and we'll get the answers to those questions as soon as we come back, everybody. So stick around. We'll be back in a moment. Alfred Webre is my guest. Okay, so we're going to go back to our interview here. We have Alfred Webre on the line with us. Okay, Alfred. So yeah, have we been to the moon?
Well, you know, let me answer that this way. That,
Okay.
In terms of absolute proof, one cannot even prove that one exists from an ontological point of view. So that in terms of absolute proof, it's difficult. But the state of knowledge of that the astronauts were at the moon is a complex situation. There seem to have been multiple scenarios going on.
Mm-hmm.
There on the one hand, there seems to have been, and this is documented, one scenario in which a prominent U.S. filmmaker may have been hired to film scenes of a faked moon landing. And on a parallel, and for various reasons, and in a parallel way, we do have photographs, we do have soundtracks and witnesses of number one, extraterrestrials and extraterrestrial ships seen by the Apollo 11 and other missions on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
We do have witness statements of a Disclosure Project witness who was at the National Security Agency headquarters in 1965, who did receive an informal briefing on the fact that NSA had photographed an extraterrestrial base on the far side of the moon. So what the situation appears to be is that the moon itself appears to be inhabited by at least one extraterrestrial race. There are some analysts that believe that the moon serves as a base for sort of the black budget national security state for kind of a renegade group of humans that run false flag operations. It's clear that there's a lot of evidence that there are continual mining operations going on the moon, that there's some evidence of ships going back and forth between the moon, perhaps carrying the ore of these mining operations. It's known that helium-3, a very rich mineral sought after from an energy point of view, exists on the moon. Kind of at one extreme, there are people who hold, and there's a body of knowledge that holds, that the moon is actually an artificial satellite. And
I've heard that.
Yeah, and I've even read views that the moon is an artificial satellite, that there's a civilization in there that operates the matrix, that controls humans' waking reality that is, what we think and what we feel. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But so there's a whole wide variety of possibilities of what exists on the moon. Ironically, we seem to have much more information as far as a harder database with regard to Mars, because there is a secret U.S. base there, and which is serviced by a teleportation corridor. And I've talked to and have corresponded with 3 separate whistleblowers who have been there to the U.S. base on Mars. And their accounts are all consistent. So that appears to be a reality. What I find of interest is Barack Obama's decision not to involve the overt space program of NASA in returning to the moon, but to leapfrog it in favor of Mars. Whereas if you go to the black budget economy, there is a very large secret Mars base there. There are teleportation corridors to Mars. Some people believe that a large segment of the black budget is based on the moon, and there's a huge amount of mining going on there, which accounts for a large revenue stream, and that the moon may be kind of a center of operations to coordinate political and social manipulation of human society.
So when do you suppose this will, they'll no longer be able to keep this secret? When will people actually be able to say, you know what, there's definitely truth to this? Now, I believe that there are extraterrestrials. I believe that there's probably planets that are inhabited right here in our own solar system. But there's a lot of people who don't.
Yeah. Well, we're in the midst of a paradigm shift now from, I guess, the 20th century version, 20th century canon is that all intelligent life ends at Earth's geostationary orbit. The 21st century kind of post-paradigm shift is that we live in a highly populated universe, which is organized and mediated by universe law and universe politics, and with its own governance bodies. And we're right in the middle of that shift now. So it's difficult to tell from the inside of the shift if we're talking about 2050 or the year 2100 or the year 2200. Is it a 200-year shift, a 100-year shift, a 30 to 50-year shift? These are very, very difficult concepts to really pin down now. And it may be an accelerated shift with the shift of energies in 2012. I know that we'll be writing a couple of articles on this subject over the next several weeks.
Okay.
But anyone who says that they have a timetable for extraterrestrial disclosure, I would be extremely skeptical of, because there are simply too many factors involved to really be able to give an exact timetable now.
Yeah, I can understand that. I definitely can. Now, I had a guest on, not to change the focus or anything, but I had a guest on here, a couple of them actually, who talked about Planet X or wormwood. Now, what is your opinion on that? Or do you have one on it?
No, we addressed that issue. I mean, I first addressed the whole issue of catastrophe in my first book in 1974, which was called The Age of Cataclysm, was published in North America and Japan, and which gave rise to a whole generation of books of kind of We Are the Earthquake generation. And we're right in the middle of a series on 2012. The first article of that, and people can go to exopolitics.com or examiner.com to get the full detail of the article. It's very lengthy. It's over 10,000 words for an examiner.com article. And what we said there was that we called the super cataclysm mean, be it a pole shift, a super solar flare, a supernova fragment, or a collision coming from a large celestial body, including Planet X. These super cataclysm memes generally come from catastrophobia, and it's not very likely that they're going to occur. And we go into the science and show why each of these is very unlikely. Now, as to the Planet X question, I mean, look, up until a couple of years ago, Pluto was a planet. So, and now it's not a planet. So it's clear that designations as planets are come and go, and those things that are at the what's a planet, what's in our solar system is fluid and subject to change. So there may be a Planet X, which is determined at some point. However, what's being asked is whether super cataclysm will come about as a result of a Planet X. And all the Planet X scenarios as super cataclysm that I've seen postulate that Planet X comes about every 3,600 years or so in periodicity, and was the cause of a super cataclysm that occurred 11,500 years ago approximately, or in 9500 BC, and in which there were great upheavals on the earth, and Atlantis was destroyed, and all sorts of things occurred. And in point of fact, that's not what occurred. There was a super cataclysm on the earth in 9500 BC, but the most plausible explanation was not a Planet X. It was that a fragment of the supernova Vela supernova at around 14,700 years ago, and it was that supernova, a fragment of which came into the solar system and had various effects, one of which was eventually to destroy the surface ecology of Mars. So it's a very fragile, big surface ecology post-collapse with a thin atmosphere. Also to destroy the great maritime civilization of Earth, which Plato knew as Atlantis. So that is, and I think that deconstructs the whole argument of Planet X as a catastrophe maker in 2012.
Okay. And now, skipping right along, because I'm good at doing this, I guess. We were just talking about how planet status changes so quickly. I wonder now, with the moon Europa, the moon of Jupiter, why wouldn't that be considered a planet when we're told that it has oceans on it and so on? I mean, wouldn't that be of planet status, despite it orbiting a larger body?
That again goes into relativity and the whole concept of our solar system over time. There are versions that the two gas giants were once suns, and that there were planets revolving around them. And this was prior to various solar system catastrophes which have happened. And that is that we've had many different versions of our own solar system here. With Jupiter and Saturn as suns, with their own planets. So it's all relative, and it has happened. There are some versions that say that it has happened in the past, and this is one of the reasons why we've put forth a proposal in our book, Exopolitics, Politics, Government, and Law in the Universe. That's the book that founded the field of exopolitics, which is the study of the relations between intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. You can get it at exopolitics.com or Amazon.com. And we propose what's called the Decade of Contact. In other words, where we really bring to bear all of our social resources, science budgets, educational resources, textbooks, curricula are really changed over, so we begin to address realistically what people need to know, which is what is the true and authentic history of us and of our planet and of our solar system. And that has yet to be investigated and written.
I think that is one huge question, and I don't know if we're ever going to get the answers, at least in my lifetime. That's like just asking, where did we come from, and how did everything become what it is? And, everybody has their own version of how that happened, and I have my theories, but, we'll never, I don't know if we'll ever really have the solid answers to that.
We may be like, way showers or forerunners or, some other name like that, people who show up early in the paradigm shift and begin to raise these issues. And so that's part of our job. And but the rate of change is accelerating, and is indeed supposed to accelerate even more. So in the long run, we have cause for optimism.
And I personally, I feel like it seems like time has sped up. I don't know if that's exactly what we're talking about, but it does. It just seems like things are happening so fast.
Yeah. One can feel it at the experiential level, where the rate of change is so rapid that if one goes into resistance patterns or tries to hold on to stuff that is really changing, then that's a sign for wasted energy because change is just happening very, very quickly. And so under these conditions of change, it could be within as soon as a couple of years from now that, we could be talking about major changes as to what we're permitted to think, what we're permitted to say, as to, outlawing war, for example.
Mm-hmm.
War has been outlawed since 1945 by the UN Charter, but, enforce it. So that may happen over the next couple of years, but we can't forget that we have very determined, we may have a very determined group of people who seem to be loose on the planet who are still intent on a scorched earth policy.
Okay.
Now, I'm just saying, I've read some preliminary emails regarding the continual oil spill in the Gulf, in
Mm-hmm.
which a person who was on the rig said that rig was in perfect shape, and that quote accident happened on April 20th, which is Adolf Hitler's birthday, which is when the Nazi underground, sort of Bush dynasty people, Cheney, all those people, do their scariest stuff, and they're now have let go something that's a Exxon Valdez every 2 days. So, this is an act of terrorism, planetary terrorism, by a group of terrorists.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
I feel that way too. I think that it's just a ploy. Next thing you know, the fuel prices are going to go skyrocketing, and just seems like a plan to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, these are scenarios of manipulation trying to force the world into breakdown and capitulation, whereas if we're conscious, we just kind of let them go by, and it's a sign that those forces that are attempting to do that are really self-destructing.
Okay. So I just want to tell everybody we're going to have Alfred with us for just a little longer. So if anybody has any questions, now is your time. It is 347-989-1012. Again, that number is 347-989-1012. Okay, so I guess my next question would be, Alfred, are extraterrestrials amongst us now?
Well,
through the time traveling and so on, do they have knowledge of that? Are they living lives with us?
Yeah, I would say that extraterrestrials are amongst us in many, many different forms. We live in an ecology of extraterrestrial interactions, and what we did about a month ago is we put out a thing called the New Typology of Extraterrestrial Civilizations. This is evidence-based, in which we identified the kind of the fundamental characteristic that differentiates different extraterrestrial civilizations, and that's their dimensionality. In other words, what dimension are they anchored in? And so we can look at civilizations as being third dimensional like us, either in our solar system or in deep space, and on a planet or solar system or in a space station. We can look at them as being hyperdimensional in some other dimension or parallel universe in the fourth dimension, fifth, sixth, seventh, and each of those has different characteristics and consequences. So there are many different senses in saying that extraterrestrials are with us. From a third dimension point of view, we have evidence that, for example, the extraterrestrial civilization that lives under the surface of Mars, well, there are representatives of the Martian culture that have knowingly been working with the U.S. aerospace industry. The Martians are humanoid, and they resemble us, so it would be very difficult to tell them apart. Also, there is anecdotal evidence and eyewitness evidence of hyperdimensional extraterrestrials being among us. First of all, the non-ethical ones, the unethical ones, the sort of the gray hyperdimensionals who have been engaged in programs of abduction and genetic farming of the human race, who are cooperating with different types of reptilian hyperdimensional civilizations. And there are also hyperdimensional civilizations which are ethical and upper dimensional. The Arcturians, the Pleiadians, and others from inside this galaxy and from outside the galaxy as well. So each of these has a different role. Those that are helping, for example, if you read the books by a woman who is a telepath of the fifth dimensional Arcturians, you'll get an idea of what the Arcturians do, which is very interesting. They have some very large spaceships parked in the fifth dimension, right in the environment of Earth, and they look after planetary stability. And so there are different roles and goals there, and they provide a counterbalance to the dark energies of the permanent war economy and the attack of the gray civilizations that are trying to occupy the planet and displace our human civilization.
And it is the Greys that are involved pretty much in abductions, are they not?
Well, it's the Greys and the reptilians, and the Greys on behalf of the reptilians, and also it's the U.S. government through my lab's military abductions that are involved in abductions also. So you have 3 or 4 different types there.
Okay. Now, are there other countries as well, or is it just the United States? Would it be China, Russia, or any of the other big ones?
That's a good question, but it appears as though the United States became the sole player in kind of the multidimensional exopolitics of post-World War II, and because it was the atomic power, it took over the legacy of Nazism. Nazism was working with the Greys, and that's where it got a lot of its power from. And the U.S., which took over the inner core of the Nazi approach to, Third Reich approach to reality, took over the core of the relationship with the extraterrestrial grays.
Okay. Well, that is definitely some good information. And as I said, I have Andy coming on next week, and I suppose he's going to tell me quite a bit about this time traveling, and I am very interested in it. One thing I do wonder now, with this teleportation, I mean, is it, and I'm not making fun of it by no means, but is it anything like what we've seen, say, on Star Trek? I mean, do they materialize when this happens, or is there another way this happens?
As I understand it, it's different because the version that's put out in Star Trek is that you demolecularize and
Yes.
you remolecularize. And what occurs really is along the lines of using using these processes which, through kind of a stargate, opens up a vortal tunnel, and you go through this vortal tunnel in the time-space hologram. You go from one point to another point in the time-space hologram, which you've dialed up, and that's how it occurs. So it's different from that other model.
Okay, and now I've heard you mention Stargate. Now I've had people tell me that they believe that the Pentagon is a Stargate.
Well, there may be Stargates in and around the Pentagon. As to whether the Pentagon itself, because of its shape, is a large Stargate, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it certainly is. I found it interesting, and I don't know.
Yeah. Certainly, I always found it very curious what the origin of the shape was, but I've never run across any eyewitness evidence that holds that Pentagon shape is a Stargate, although it stands to reason that there would be many Stargates located in the vicinity of the Pentagon.
Now, a lot of people speculate, and I know here I go again skipping around, but a lot of people speculate about the Pierce. Now, what do those have to do with extraterrestrials, if anything?
The phone made a thing, and I didn't hear the subject of the sentence. What was it?
Oh, okay. Well, I had asked, what do the pyramids have to do with extraterrestrials? Yes.
Okay. Well, from an evidence point of view, what we found, and people can go to www.projectmars.net to look at some of the photographic evidence, but using the NASA Mars rover photographs from the surface of Mars, we've been able to get images of with an Egyptian motif, either of pharaohs or kind of the Nefertiti figures, or of sarcophaguses with Egyptian kings on them on the surface of Mars, with the suggestion that prior to the solar system catastrophe of 9500 BC, it appears as though there was an active link, an active governmental or social link between Egypt and Mars. In fact, Cairo in Egyptian means Mars. So we're not certain yet whether Earth was a colony of Mars or Mars was a colony of Earth, but it's something along those lines. So the Egyptian pyramids appear to have been part of a pyramidal culture common to planets in the solar system. We know that they exist on Mars, and we know that they exist on Earth. And on Earth, they appear to be, at least, some of the Egyptian pyramids, and certainly some of the others, to be very astrologically refined and located. For example, the large pyramid of Giza has a special alignment with the planet Mars, and I've seen other alignments that it supposedly has. They may be sort of machines for the amplification of ki, or the cosmic energy. So they're a lot of important functions that may have been had by these, but not limited to Earth, on Mars also, and perhaps on other planets within the inhabited solar system.
Yes, I definitely had heard about the pyramids on Mars, and that they were almost, or at least in the most exact place that they are here on Earth. And it just seems like they're strategically set up. And, those aren't natural structures. I mean, somebody built those.
Right.
And we can't even duplicate them today.
Right. Exactly.
So, but Alfred, we have about 6 more minutes to go here for the segment. So if you want to go ahead and give out your websites or anything else you want to get out there, you've got 6 minutes, and you can go ahead and do that now.
Well, yeah. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I'd like to say is that we are working to bring out leading edge disclosures and information, and one central place that you can go is exopolitics.com, www.exopolitics.com. There you'll find all of the updates to our Examiner articles, which come out 2 and 3 times a week. You can also go to the Examiner website and subscribe for free to these updates. You can also download and order a copy of our book, Exopolitics. There's also a breaking news section there. So with that, we also link into a number of other disclosure websites, Project Mars.net and ProjectPegasus.net. All of these are linked into, and so the easiest place to go is at www.exopolitics.com, and that's sort of our mission there, and it's a worldwide mission. It's a bilingual site, both in terms of English and Spanish. We have just opened up the first Exopolitics chapter in Latin America, Exopolitics Argentina, and that's linked there as well.
Okay, great. Alfred, I appreciate so much you coming back on Late Night in the Midlands and being a guest.
Okay.
And I look forward to having you again in the near future.
Wonderful.
And yes, absolutely. And again, thank you so much. And your link is also up on my website at www.latenightintthemidlands.com.
Sure.
And I will keep it there. Okay, my friend. Well, thank you again, and you have a great night, Alfred.
Thank you.
Okay, good night now. Everybody, that was Alfred Webre. We talked a little bit about everything. I guess that's how I do it. I like to skip around. We talked about Mars. We talked about the moon, the pyramids, and even Europa. So much.
We've had a very interesting week in that Professor Stephen Hawking, who is a very eminent, quote, scientist, some people say is the sacred cow of science, has launched a Discovery Channel documentary.
Yes, yes.
Right, in which he makes a number of very polarizing statements about extraterrestrial civilizations.
I believe he said, oh yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, and most recently about time travel. And we can go into each of those. But what we did is we deconstructed each of the statements in our Examiner columns. People can go to either exopolitics.com or examiner.com and just Google my name. And you'll come to these articles. And on examination, it would appear that Professor Hawking is really acting as a purveyor of what's called disinformation, and that's deliberately confusing information. One of the best formulas is to mix in some correct information with some. What we noticed is that if you went back to a January 2010 conference at the Royal Society, now Hawking himself was elected a member of the Royal Society in 1974, one of the youngest members ever. And in a January 2010 conference on extraterrestrial life, a fellow Cambridge professor of his sort of parroted the same line. Simon Conway Morris, who's a professor of evolutionary paleobiology at Cambridge, said, quote, extraterrestrials might not only resemble us, but have our foibles, such as greed, violence, and a tendency to exploit others' resources. And while aliens could come in peace, they're quite likely to be searching for somewhere to live and to help themselves to water, minerals, and fuel.
See, now I can't believe that because, again, they could have done it already if they wanted to, you know?
Yeah. So this is a particular line, and there are some students of extraterrestrials who believe that this accurately describes, say, certain types of extraterrestrials who
have gotten through our little technical difficulty, and so let us bring on Alfred Webre. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
How are you tonight? Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Well, I don't know. I think it might be Mercury retrograde. I don't know.
Oh, yeah? So we had you on not too long ago, and we talked about colonies on Mars and even time travel. And I'd like to get into that just a little more, as well as I believe there's some information about the moon as well that we were going to talk about this evening.
Right. Yeah, a lot of very interesting information, which is now making its way out of speculation, because we have firm information.
Okay.
Yeah, good. So do you want me to launch into it, or?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Go right ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, with regard to time travel and extraterrestrials, um, uh, we are hyperdimensional in the fourth dimension. For example, the certain types of greys and reptilians who have a predatory relationship with humanity and who have entered into one-side treaties with the permanent war economy here on Earth. But that doesn't make it for a blanket statement that we should avoid all extraterrestrial civilizations.
If anything, they should avoid us.
Well, no, the argument being, and that these civilizations, particularly the Greys and the reptilians, their various versions of this are actually engaged in genetic farming of us.
Okay.
That is, they're farming us for our genes, and that they're actually breeding a new kind of hybrid species to supplant us. Now, some people like Dr. David Jacobs and others believe that we are in dire danger because of that. So I think that Professor Hawking is playing to that fear, correct, information to confuse the public about it, an area that's the subject of a disclosure campaign. So that's what we have been covering about Professor Hawking.
Now, didn't he say that it would be dangerous for us to make contact with extraterrestrials? And why would he say something like that? I mean, if they wanted to now take us out, they could have done it a long time ago.
Yeah. This is very curious. I've got his quote here. He says, quote, "We have only to look to ourselves to see how intelligent life might develop into something we wouldn't want to meet. I imagine they might exist in massive ships, having used up all the resources from their home planet. Such advanced aliens would perhaps become nomads looking to conquer and colonize whatever planets they can reach. If aliens ever visit us, I think the outcome would be much as when Christopher Columbus first landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native Americans. While there may be aliens out there, Hawkins said trying to make contact is a little too risky." So that is clearly a sort of a blanket statement, and